The emergency alert screamed through my phone at exactly 3:45 a.m., that jarring government tone that always makes your heart jump even when you're expecting it. I fumbled for the device on my nightstand, squinting at the bright screen in our dark bedroom. Emergency alert, missing child Bradley Hansen, age 8, last seen wearing blue pajamas. Stay inside, stay away from windows. What the hell? I muttered, reading it twice to make sure I wasn't still half asleep. Barbara's phone went off a second later with the same piercing sound, and she sat up immediately, her hair messy from sleep. "Alice, what is that?" She grabbed her phone, and I watched her face change as she read the message. "This doesn't make sense." I was already pulling up the local news website on my phone. "It's probably just a technical error. You know how these alert systems get glitchy sometimes." But even as I said it, something felt off. I'd gotten plenty of Amber Alerts over the years, and they never told people to stay inside or avoid windows. They usually wanted everyone out looking. "Look at this part again," Barbara said, holding her phone toward me. "Stay away from windows. What does that have to do with a missing kid?" I scrolled through 3 different news sites, finding absolutely nothing about any Bradley Hansen or missing child situation. No police statements, no search parties, nothing. There's no coverage anywhere. "It's definitely a system malfunction." Barbara read the alert again, her voice getting that worried edge I knew too well. But why would a malfunction add those specific warnings? "Stay inside, stay away from windows." That sounds like there's something dangerous out there. Maybe it's weather-related, and got crossed with the missing child alert somehow. I was grasping, but it seemed more logical than the alternatives. Or there's an active police search happening, and they don't want civilians interfering. She wasn't buying it. Barbara had this way of picking up on things that didn't feel right, and once she got that look, she'd worry at it like a loose thread until something unraveled. "Alice, this feels wrong, really wrong." I set my phone back on the nightstand and reached for her hand. "Look, whatever it is, we're safe inside. We'll follow the instructions and stay put until morning, then figure out what happened." That's when I noticed the basement door. It stood maybe 6 inches open, a slice of darkness visible beyond the frame. I stared at it from our bed, trying to remember if I'd left it that way. No, I distinctly remembered checking all the locks before we went to sleep, my usual routine. The basement door had definitely been closed. "Barbara," I kept my voice calm. "Did you go downstairs after we went to bed?" "No, why?" She followed my gaze and went very still. "That door was closed. I watched you check it." I got up and walked over to examine it. Barbara right behind me. The deadbolt was still engaged, the lock completely intact. I pulled the door shut firmly and tested the handle. It held solid. "The house is old," I said, more to convince myself than her. "The foundation settles. Doors shift. It probably just swung open on its own." "Doors don't just swing open when they're locked, Alice. The lock's still engaged. See?" I jiggled the handle again. It must have been slightly ajar already, and gravity did the rest. Barbara wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the door like it might open again while we watched. "We should call the police." "And tell them what?" "That we got a weird emergency alert, and our basement door opened by itself." I guided her back toward the bed. "Let's wait until morning unless something else actually happens. If there really is some kind of emergency situation, the last thing we want to do is tie up police resources with a non-emergency call." She climbed back into bed reluctantly, but I could tell she wasn't going to sleep. Barbara had this way of absorbing anxiety and holding on to it, letting it build until she couldn't think about anything else. I needed to redirect her attention before she spiraled. "Think about it logically," I said, settling in beside her. "If there was real danger, we'd be hearing sirens, seeing police cars, getting follow-up alerts with actual information. One garbled message doesn't constitute an emergency. But what if it's not garbled? What if someone really is missing and there's a reason we need to stay inside?" I pulled the covers up and tried to make my voice sound drowsy and unconcerned. "Then we're doing exactly what we're supposed to do. We're inside, we're safe, and we'll get more information in the morning." Barbara lay down but kept her phone in her hand, reading the alert over and over. I could practically feel the worry radiating off her, but I didn't know what else to say. Sometimes the best thing I could do was model calm behavior and hope she'd follow my lead. The house settled around us with its usual creaks and sighs, old wood adjusting to temperature changes. Normal sounds that I'd learned to tune out over the 3 years we'd lived here. But now, with Barbara tense beside me and that strange alert still glowing on our phones, every noise seemed amplified. I closed my eyes and tried to focus on my breathing, the way my therapist had taught me years ago. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. The basement door was closed and locked. The alert was probably a technical error. Everything had a rational explanation, but I couldn't shake the image of that door standing open, or the feeling that something had changed in our house while we slept. The crash hit like a bomb going off, yanking me straight out of that uneasy half-sleep I'd finally managed to find. Barbara shot upright beside me, her hand already clutching my arm. "What was that?" she whispered, but we both knew it wasn't a question that needed answering. Something big had broken downstairs. I rolled out of bed and went straight for the closet, grabbing the aluminum baseball bat we kept behind my winter coats. Barbara was already dialing 911, her fingers shaking as she pressed the numbers. "Yes, we need police at 847 Maple Street," she said into the phone, her voice steadier than I expected. "Someone just broke into our house." I crept toward our bedroom door, bat raised, listening for footsteps or voices. Nothing. Just this awful silence that felt heavier than the crash itself. "They're sending officers," Barbara whispered, hanging up. "Should we stay here? I need to see what happened." I turned the doorknob slowly, every muscle in my body coiled tight. "Stay behind me." We made our way downstairs, and I could see immediately what had caused the noise. Our kitchen window was completely destroyed, glass scattered across the linoleum like deadly confetti. The cold October air rushed through the opening, making the curtains dance. But that wasn't the worst part. The basement door hung wide open again, and this time I knew for certain it had been locked. I'd checked it myself after the first incident. The deadbolt was still engaged, but somehow the door had opened anyway, revealing that black rectangle of space below our house. "Alice," Barbara breathed, grabbing my arm. "Do you hear that?" I held my breath and listened. Scratching sounds drifted up from the basement, like fingernails dragging across concrete. Then something else. A soft shuffling, like bare feet moving across the floor. "Hello?" I called down the stairs, my voice cracking slightly. "Police are on their way. You need to come up here right now." The scratching stopped. The shuffling stopped. But then I heard something that made my skin crawl. Whispered voices, too low and distorted to make out words, but definitely human. Multiple voices having some kind of conversation in our basement. Barbara pressed closer to me, and I could feel her trembling. There's more than one person down there. I wanted to argue, to find some logical explanation, but those whispers were unmistakably real. Someone had broken our window and was hiding in our basement, and they weren't alone. "We're going back upstairs," I said, backing away from the basement door. "We wait for the police." We huddled in our living room, me still gripping the bat, Barbara checking her phone every 30 seconds for updates. The whispers had stopped, but occasionally we'd hear more shuffling or scraping from below. Whatever was down there knew we were listening. When the police finally arrived, their flashlight beams cutting through our front windows, I'd never been so relieved to see anyone in my life. 2 officers came to the door, a tall redhead with sharp eyes and a shorter woman with kind features, who immediately focused on Barbara. "I'm Officer Duncan, this is Officer James," the redhead said, scanning our living room with professional efficiency. "You reported a break-in." I led them to the kitchen and showed them the destroyed window. Officer Duncan crouched down, examining the glass pattern with her flashlight. "Looks like the impact came from outside," she said. "Could be a thrown object, or possibly an animal collision. There are people in our basement," Barbara said. "We heard voices." Officer James nodded seriously. "We'll check it out. You two stay up here." I watched them descend into the basement, their flashlight beams sweeping back and forth. They were down there for what felt like forever, checking every corner, every hiding spot. When they finally came back up, Officer Duncan was shaking her head. "No signs of any intruder," she said. "No footprints, no disturbed areas, nothing. But we did find some scratches on the concrete that look fresh." "What about the voices?" Barbara asked. Officer James gave her a sympathetic look. "Scared animals can make sounds that seem almost human, especially when you're already on edge. We think a raccoon or maybe a possum broke through your window looking for food or shelter. They're surprisingly vocal when they're stressed." "But the basement door was locked," I said. "How would an animal open a locked door?" Officer Duncan examined the door frame with her flashlight. "This lock mechanism is pretty old. Sometimes the bolt doesn't catch properly, especially if the door frame has shifted over time. A strong wind from the broken window could have pushed it open." I wanted to argue, but her explanation made sense. More sense than multiple intruders who could somehow vanish without a trace. "You'll want to board up that window tonight," Officer James said, "and call an exterminator in the morning. Once animals find a way in, they tend to come back. After the officers left, Barbara and I spent an hour taping cardboard over the broken window. The whole time, she kept glancing toward the basement door, which I'd firmly closed and locked again. "I know what I heard," she said as we headed back upstairs. "Those weren't animal sounds." "You heard something," I agreed, trying to keep my voice gentle. "But when you're scared and it's dark, your brain can interpret sounds differently. The officers know what they're talking about." We climbed back into bed around 5:30, both of us exhausted but wired. I lay there listening for any sounds from below, but the house stayed quiet. Maybe the police presence had scared off whatever animal had taken shelter down there. Barbara curled up against me, and I could feel the tension slowly leaving her body as the minutes passed without incident. The rational explanation was working, at least for now, but I couldn't stop thinking about those whispers, how distinctly human they'd sounded in the moment, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something important, something the officers hadn't found in their search. I closed my eyes and tried to focus on the silence, telling myself it meant we were safe. Whatever had happened tonight was over. I woke up to Barbara screaming. Not a startled gasp or confused mumble, a full-throated, terror-filled scream that shot through me like electricity. My eyes snapped open and I bolted upright, immediately following her horrified gaze to our bedroom window. A figure stood in our backyard, maybe 20 feet from the house. Completely motionless, like a statue someone had placed on our lawn in the middle of the night. Even from this distance, I could see he was pale and thin, wearing what looked like blue pajamas that hung loose on his gaunt frame. "Oh my God," Barbara whispered, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Alice, look at him. Just look." The person, and it had to be a person, right? Appeared to be a young man, though something about his proportions seemed wrong. Too tall for a child, but with this strange, stretched quality that made my skin crawl. His dark hair was matted against his skull, and his face was turned directly toward our window, staring right at us with this empty, unblinking gaze that made every instinct in my body scream danger. "That's him," I said, my voice coming out hoarse. "That has to be Bradley Hanson from the alert. But he looks older," Barbara finished. "Way older than 8. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, never taking my eyes off the figure. He hadn't moved a muscle since I'd started watching him. Not even the slight sway you'd expect from someone just standing there. It was like he'd been frozen mid-step. Before I could dial 911, both our phones erupted with that same piercing emergency tone. I nearly dropped mine, my heart hammering as I read the new message. "Emergency alert. Stay inside. Stay away from windows. It is in your house." "What the hell does that mean?" I whispered. But even as I said it, Barbara grabbed my arm. "Alice." Her voice was barely audible. "Do you hear that?" I held my breath and listened. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from somewhere below us. Not the quick scurrying of an animal this time. These had weight behind them, the measured pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The figure outside tilted his head at an impossible angle, like an owl rotating its neck, but his eyes never left mine. That empty stare seemed to bore right through the glass, through me, like he could see every terrified thought racing through my brain. Then he raised one hand and started tapping on our window. The sound was soft but deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. His bony fingers creating a rhythm that perfectly matched the footsteps echoing up from our basement. One outside, one inside, moving in perfect synchronization like they were following some predetermined plan. "There are 2 of them," Barbara breathed, and I knew she was right. Whatever was happening, we were caught between them. I grabbed Barbara's hand and yanked her away from the window, my rational mind finally kicking into gear. "We need to block the door. Help me move the dresser." We shoved our heavy wooden dresser across the bedroom door, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. The tapping outside continued, steady and patient, while those footsteps below seemed to be moving closer to the stairs. Then everything stopped. The tapping cut off mid-rhythm. The footsteps went silent. Even the normal house sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of air through the vents, seemed to disappear. The silence felt thick and wrong, like the air before a tornado hits. I checked my phone again, scrolling back through the emergency alerts we'd received. Something had been bothering me about them, and now I could see what it was. The sender information showed a phone number instead of an official emergency system code, a local number with our area code. "Barbara," I said, my mouth going dry. "These alerts aren't coming from the emergency system. Look at this number." She leaned over to see my screen, and I watched her face go white. "That's not possible. Emergency alerts come from the government, not random phone numbers. I was already Googling the number, but nothing came up. No business listing, no reverse lookup results, nothing, like it didn't exist outside of these messages. The silence stretched on, and somehow that felt worse than any sound. At least when they were moving, I knew where they were. Now they could be anywhere, doing anything, and we'd have no warning. Barbara pressed close to me, both of us staring at the barricaded door like it might explode inward at any second. "What do they want?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. Nothing about this made sense. Not the alerts, not the figure outside, not the way that basement door kept opening despite being locked. My rational mind kept trying to find explanations, but every logical possibility crumbled under the weight of what we'd actually seen and heard. The figure outside had looked human, but no human stood that still or moved their head that way. The footsteps below sounded human, but what person could navigate our basement in complete darkness without bumping into anything? And those alerts, someone was sending them deliberately, watching us, knowing exactly what was happening in our house. I clutched my phone tighter, thumb hovering over the 911 button. But what would I even say? That we were getting fake emergency alerts, and there were maybe people surrounding our house. After last night's false alarm with the broken window, would they even take us seriously? The silence pressed down on us, heavy and expectant, like the whole house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, waiting for us to make the next move, but I had no idea what that move should be.